The wind screeched across the open plain like a banshee, whipping ash and soot from the charred remains of the Whitlock homestead. Smoke coiled in the sky above, black and bitter, carrying the scent of gunpowder, blood, and something far worse loss. A Union-issue sniper rifle, far too long for its current bearer, lay cradled in the arms of a girl no older than 11. Her hands were raw, knuckles split open, and her face streaked with soot and salt. But her eyes, they were the kind of eyes men carried back from war. Hollow, quiet, and burning from somewhere deep. She sat there in the silence, boots gone, toes blistered, hair tangled like dry rope. The fire had taken everything. Her father's blue coat still smoked beneath a collapsed beam. Her mother's body had been dragged behind the barn, her apron caught on a nail, flapping gently like a flag. Her older brother, Jacob, was nowhere to be seen, but his rifle had been left behind, leaning against a blood-streaked fence. That was how Clara May Whitlock had survived, by not being seen, by holding her breath in the crawlspace beneath the floorboards while the Red-Tooth Gang drank her father's whiskey and laughed like hyenas. She hadn't cried. Not when the gunshots cracked. Not when the dog yelped once and fell silent. Not even when the screaming stopped and only the wind remained. She hadn't cried because crying was for people who believed something would come after. And Clara, no, longer believed in much of anything. A rifle was longer than her arm span. The recoil alone had once thrown Jacob off balance when he was 15. But Clara had watched him shoot every evening, watched how he braced, breathed, squeezed. And now the rifle was hers, whether she could carry it or not. Days passed. Clara didn't know how many. She walked barefoot across frozen mud and dry brush, following train tracks with no clear direction. The world had become a series of shadows and hunger. Her arms ached from hauling the rifle, but she never set it down. It was too heavy for her body, but it anchored her soul. She found barns with hay, drank from creeks. Once she tried to steal an apple and was chased off by a ranch hand with a whip. The welt across her back oozed pus for days. Still, she kept moving. It was the storm that nearly killed her came in fast. Blue-black clouds rolling like a cavalry charge. The rain turned to hail, then snow. She collapsed in a ditch, clutching the rifle like it was her mother's hand. That's how the scout patrol found her half-frozen, muttering her brother's name into the wind dot at Fort Bridger. The soldiers were mostly boys trying to be men. They didn't know what to make of her. Small, dirty, with eyes too calm for comfort. Sergeant Hardley called her Mouse. Told her to stay out of the way. She didn't argue. She ate what they gave her, slept on the floor by the stables, and kept the rifle within reach. Always. One afternoon, the fort held a long-range bell test. New recruits lined up to fire at a distant target 2,000 yards out. Most couldn't hit within 100 feet. The wind was unpredictable. Dust danced like ghosts. Maybe we let Mouse give it a go. Hardly chuckled, tossing Clara a look that said he expected her to fail so spectacularly it would amuse the entire camp. She stood without a word. No one offered her help. She walked, barefoot across the dry packed earth, climbed the range mound, and lay flat with the rifle across her arms. It dwarfed her. The men snickered. One whispered, "She'll break her shoulder clean." Clara didn't flinch. She adjusted the strap Jacob had modified for his chest. She remembered the way he used to line up the scope with his eyes slow, patient, never blinking. She exhaled. Wind gusted. Dust curled around her like smoke. She counted heartbeats. Then she pulled the trigger. The shot cracked across the plain like thunder. The recoil slammed into her collarbone, and her body rocked back, but she didn't cry out. She held her breath. Waited. Then dash clang. The sound rang out sharp and pure. The distant bell trembled on its post. Silence fell over the camp. Not no laughter. No snide remarks. Just the soft whistle of the wind and the stunned faces of boys who'd seen enough death to know when something real had happened. Sergeant hardly dropped his mug. Clara stood, one arm cradling her bruised shoulder. She walked back without a word, past the wide eyes and open mouths, and returned to her spot by the stables, sat down, held the rifle. That night, she didn't sleep. Someone had watched her. Not a soldier, not a boy. Something else, she'd felt. The eyes through the trees. Far beyond the fort's wooden walls, in the shadow line between light and wilderness, a tall figure stood still as stone. Long braids, leather cloak, eyes like carved obsidian. He had watched her shoot. Then he vanished. Clara did not know who he was, or why the moment mattered. But for the first time in days, her hands trembled just a little. Not from fear, from something older, something stirring. The stars above Fort Bridger blinked cold and distant, as if they too were watching the girl who slept curled like a question mark beside the stables. Clara's breath fogged in the night air. The rifle lay beside her, wrapped in an old saddle. Blanket, guarded like a sleeping child. Soldiers drank by the fire, laughing too loud, playing cards they didn't know how to win. None of them spoke to her, not after the bell shot. She'd become something else to them. Not quite human. Not quite safe. By morning, Clara was gone. The rifle's absence was noticed before she was. No note, no trail. Just silence and the faint imprint of bare feet in the dust, already half blown away by the wind. The fort didn't send anyone after her. Some assumed she died in the cold. Others pretended not to notice she had left at all. She moved through the wild like a shadow with a heartbeat. The sun was cruel by day, the frost unforgiving by night. Her shoulder throbbed where the rifle had slammed bone, but she kept it pressed close. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. She tried snaring rabbits, failed. Ate roots she wasn't sure were safe, drank rain off tree bark. She remembered stories her father told her about men starving in the war, chewing leather and dirt. She didn't feel that far off. The forest gave her no kindness. A storm snapped branches like bones overhead. Once, a bear passed so close she felt its breath warm against the roots where she hid. Another time, wolves followed her scent until she crossed a river so frigid it turned her lips blue. She bled from thorns, from cracked saws, from splinters. She pulled with her teeth, but still, she carried the rifle. It was near dusk when she first saw the footprint. Not hers. Not booted. A moccasin, wide and flat, deep, deliberate. She crouched beside it, breath caught in her throat. For a long time, she didn't move. Then she looked around. Trees sighed in the wind. Nothing else. The next morning, a fish lay beside. Her fire ring cleaned, head still intact. Not a sound in the forest. No tracks, no smoke. Just the fish, placed like an offering. She didn't eat it at first. Could have been poisoned, she thought. But by nightfall, hunger beat suspicion. She cooked it on a stick, eyes watching every rustle, every shadow. She slept lightly, rifle across her chest. The next day, the snare she'd set and forgotten held a rabbit, perfectly reset. That night, the firewood was stacked differently than how she left it. Clara wasn't alone. And whoever watched her didn't mean harm. She caught her first glimpse of him at dawn. A figure between trees, tall, motionless. His coat was leather, worn to a dull earth brown. Feathers in his braid, markings on his hands. He didn't approach, just stood and watched, like she was a flame, and he was waiting to see if she would burn out. Then he turned and disappeared, without a word. Clara didn't chase him. She didn't need to. Something in her gut, something ancient, said he would return. And he did. Every few days, she'd see him again, just at the edge of sight. Once, he was closer, squatting near a stream, cleaning a knife. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. Clara didn't speak. He didn't either. But their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition, not of name or purpose, of pain, of silence, of survival. He began showing her things wordlessly. Left pine tar by her bedding when her wounds festered. Hung fish from branches to keep them from scavengers. One morning, her traps were set exactly right, not how she left them, but better, more precise, more lethal. He carved her a shoulder brace from deer leather and fitted it to the rifle stock. Left it beside her while she slept. When she found it, she stared at it for a long time. Then, with slow fingers, she picked up the piece of bone he had tied into the leather cord, a carved bird. A hawk, maybe, or a raven. She tied it to the sling, and didn't cry, but her throat swelled with something that felt close. They began to move together, without words. He led. She followed. He would glance back once, never twice. If she was behind, he slowed. If she stumbled, he waited. Their language was wind and footstep, gesture and silence. He showed her how to walk without breaking a twig, how to breathe with the rhythm of the leaves, how to shoot not with her arms, but her whole body. He taught her that the world was a map you didn't read with eyes, but with instinct. Clara watched everything, memorized his hand signals, learned how to tell a coyote from a wolf by the track. Depth. She began moving like him, low, fluid, quiet. They never talked about why he was helping her. She never asked. She didn't know his name. But one night, as the moon sliced silver through the trees, she finally spoke. Why? She asked. The man sat by the fire, sharpening a stone blade. He paused. You aim like storm, he said, voice like rustling. Leaves, but storm breaks body. Clara looked down at her bruised shoulder. He handed her a small pouch of dried herbs. For pain. She nodded once. They didn't speak again. The next day, they reached the ridge. Smoke rose from the valley below, thick, dark, unmistakable. A homestead burning. Screams faint in the wind. Horse prints scarred the earth below. Clara lifted her rifle without thinking. Her jaw clenched. Beside her, the man exhaled through his nose. Red Tooth, he murmured. The name hit her like ice water. She gripped the rifle tighter. Her knuckles WHENED. And for the first time, she saw fear in someone else's eyes. Not hers. Not the soldier's single quotes. Still, he didn't stop her. He only said, if you go, you do not come back same. Clara didn't answer. She already knew. She wasn't the same girl who'd left Fort Bridger. And the fire in the valley hadn't just lit up a house. It had lit up something in her she didn't know was still alive. The wind shifted, carrying the unmistakable stench of burning oil and scorched flesh. From the ridge, Clara could see the plumes of smoke curling upward, twisting like angry fingers into the gray sky. The Red Tooth Gang hadn't just taken the homestead, they were feeding the land its own bones. Barn collapsed, roof caved in. She could make out the figures 6, maybe 7 armed, laughing too loud, moving with the swagger of men who knew no justice would come for them. Alou crouched beside her, silent as ever, his eyes scanning the valley below with the precision of a hawk. His face was carved from stone, unreadable, but Clara felt the tension. In his shoulders, he didn't like this. Not the numbers. Not the fire. Not the risk. They have people inside, she whispered, barely a breath on the wind. He nodded once, slow. You cannot save everyone. Clara's jaw locked. She looked through the scope of her rifle. In the distance, near the barn, she saw A child no older than 7 dragged by the arm, stumbling in the dirt. A woman cried out behind her, slapped back by a man in a tattered cavalry coat. Her fingers tightened on the trigger. Elu reached out, not to stop her, but to steady her. "Wait," he said softly. "If we strike loud, they scatter, kill, burn, and vanish." Clara's breath hitched. She knew he was right. A direct assault would end in a massacre. These weren't men who held lines or followed rules. They were animals in stolen uniforms. Ghosts of war who'd chosen lawlessness over peace. She pulled back from the scope and sat in the grass, the rifle across her lap. "What do we do?" Elu didn't answer immediately. He pulled a small pouch from his belt and began laying out pebbles. In the dirt, mapping the terrain, hills, creek, wind direction, the sun's arc. He was teaching her not just how to kill, but how to think like a storm, not a spark. They spent the rest of the day watching, moving silently between rocks and brush, memorizing patterns. The gang was careless, overconfident. One of them relieved himself within a foot of Clara's hiding spot, never noticing the girl in the grass just beyond the tall weeds. By dusk, they had a plan. Elu would draw attention from the south side set. Fire to the outer hay pile. Clara would take the ridge, use elevation and distance to drop the lookouts. Timing had to be perfect. Every second mattered. They didn't speak as they parted. He placed a hand on her shoulder briefly. A gesture that said everything. Then he vanished into the trees. Clara climbed the ridge alone. The sun bled across the horizon, casting the valley in gold and rust. She found her perch flat, shielded by a rise in the earth. She lay flat, elbows braced, breath steady, just like Jacob had shown her. Just like Elu had refined. Down below, the fire started. First, smoke. Then shouts. The gang scattered in confusion. Clara exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The first man dropped before he even knew he'd been shot. A perfect lung hit. She adjusted. Second shot. A man with a torch stumbled, fell hard, rolled in the eye. Dust as flame caught his sleeve. She didn't wait to watch him burn. Third shot missed. The wind shifted unexpectedly. Dust clouded her view. She adjusted again. Fourth shot through the window of the barn. A sharp cry, then silence. Below, chaos erupted. Horses broke free, screaming. A woman ran, dragging her child. 2 of the gang pursued. Clara lifted her head from the scope, heart pounding. She had no more clean shots, and then gunfire. From the tree line. Short bursts, fast, precise. Elu. The men chasing the woman dropped like felled trees. Clara rolled to her side, reloaded. Her shoulder screamed in protest, but she gritted her teeth and pushed through it. She returned to her scope just in time to see the red-toothed leader emerge from the barn massif, scarred, dragging a woman by the collar. His eyes swept the ridge. He shouted something, but the words were lost in the wind. He lifted a shotgun and fired wildly in her direction. Pellets bit the dirt around her. Clara ducked. The recoil of his weapon gave her a window. She rose and fired. The round hit him in the thigh. He roared in rage, let go of the woman, and limped behind a wagon. Clara moved again, position to position, just as Elu had taught her. The battlefield shifted with her movements. Smoke thickened. The screams became fewer. Then silence. And then she heard it. Heavy boots behind her. She turned. Too late. The red-toothed leader had circled up the ridge, bloodied but alive. His face was a mask of fury. He swung the butt of his shotgun, catching her temple. The world spun. She hit the ground hard, the rifle skidding out of reach. He grabbed her by the neck, lifted her clean off the ground. His breath reeked of whiskey and rot. "You little rat," he snarled. Think you can play soldier? She gasped, clawed at his arms, kicked with everything she had. Should have burned you with the others. Her vision darkened. Stars blinked behind her eyes. She reached for her boot Jacob's knife. Fingers brushed leather. He squeezed harder than steel in her palm. She slashed blindly. The blade sank into his leg. He howled and dropped her. She scrambled, crawling toward her rifle. He raised his shotgun, aiming to finish her then dash, crack, A. Single shot echoed through the trees. The bandit's head snapped back. Then forward, then still. He crumpled at her feet. Clara looked up. Elu stood on the ridge opposite her. Rifle still aimed, eyes calm. Clara trembled not from fear, but from the sound of her heartbeat catching up to her life. The valley was quiet. Now, the Red Tooth Gang was finished. But the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like the eye of something larger. The wind that rolled through the valley the next morning was softer, less cruel, as if it knew something terrible had passed and dared not disturb the silence left behind. Smoke curled from the ruins of the farmhouse, but the fires had died. The dead lay where they'd fallen, some twisted in the dirt. Others sprawled in positions that suggested they never saw death coming. Vultures circled high above, waiting patiently. The land was quiet. Too quiet. Clara stood near the barn, rifle slung across her back, hair matted with blood and soot. Her left eye was swollen, lips split, hands trembling though she tried not to. Show it. The ache in her shoulder felt deep, almost to the bone, but she wouldn't ask for help. She hadn't cried when the man tried to kill her. She didn't cry now. Around her, the survivors moved with quiet urgency. The freed captives 3. Women, 2 children, and an old man gathered supplies, covered bodies with old blankets, and whispered thanks in passing. No one asked who she was. No one questioned her place in the fight. They saw what she'd done. And that was enough. You emerged from the trees, rifle slung low, his gaze sweeping the area like a silent sentinel. He moved with the same deliberate stillness he always had, but there was something different in his eyes, now something less guarded. He looked at Clara and nodded once. She nodded back. They didn't need words. Later that afternoon, cavalry flags crested the hill. The army had finally come. Dust billowed as a dozen riders thundered down into the valley, faces pale beneath wide-brimmed hats, eyes narrowing as they took in the aftermath. The lieutenant in charge dismounted first, young and polished, sword at his hip, boots too clean. He looked at Clara, then at Elu, then at the corpses sprawled in the dirt. Who led this? He asked. No one answered. He turned to Clara. Girl, I asked. She did, said the older woman who had been freed. Her voice was hoarse but certain. The girl saved us all. The lieutenant blinked, clearly thrown off. Clara met his gaze without flinching. There was no triumph in her face. No pride. Only exhaustion. They brought her back to Fort Bridger in a covered wagon, wrapped in a spare soldier's coat. Her rifle lay beside her, and no one dared to touch it. Word traveled fast. By the time they rolled through the gates, men who had once laughed behind her back now stood at attention. Some saluted. Others just stared, wide-eyed, like they were seeing a ghost. Sergeant Hardley stood at the entrance to the mess hall, arms folded. He looked older, somehow. Smaller. He didn't speak as she passed. Inside the command tent, the general leaned over a map when she entered. He straightened slowly, taking in the dirt-caked girl with the too large weapon and eyes like winter. I've heard ... stories, he said carefully. 7 men dead, civilians saved. 1 child with a sniper's eye. Clara said nothing. The general looked at her rifle. Whose weapon is that? She answered quietly. My brother's. And where is he? Now? Gone. He exhaled, long and slow, then stepped forward, pulled a medal from a drawer, and held it out. We don't have a rule book for this kind of thing, but bravery deserves recognition. She stared at the medal, unmoving. I don't want it, she said. He blinked. Why? Because it won't bring them back. The room fell silent. The general cleared his throat. You could stay here. Train others. We could. No. She cut in. I'm not a soldier. He hesitated, then nodded. Then what will you do? Clara looked out the tent flap toward the mountains rising beyond the fort. I'll keep moving. That night, she left without ceremony. Packed what little she had, wrapped the rifle in cloth and tied it to her back. No one stopped her. No one said goodbye. At the edge of the forest, Elu was waiting. She approached him slowly. He handed her a small leather pouch, dried meat, herbs, flint. Then he reached into his coat and produced something she hadn't seen before. Her brother's army badge, polished clean, its brass glinting under the moonlight. She stared at it, stunned. I found it near the creek, he said. Thought it was yours. Clara took it gently, fingers tracing the edges. Thank you. They walked in silence for a time, through trees that whispered and branches that sighed. A fox darted across their path. Owls watched from above. The world had opened its arms to her again, but she was not the same girl who had once wandered lost and bleeding. They camped under the stars. She cleaned the rifle methodically. Elu carved something into a piece of pine, another bird, like the one he'd given her before. This one, its wings were spread wide. Clara held it in her hand for a long time, then tied it to the sling beside the first dot in the morning. They went their separate ways. No goodbye, just a shared look that said everything words could not. He turned east. She went west. Years passed. In another place, another war. A young recruit was handed a rifle unlike any he'd seen before. Long, perfectly balanced. Etched into the stock was a name, Clara May Whitlock, and below it, a single phrase, carved deep and clean. Wind never breaks me. He looked up at the sergeant. Who was she? The older man smiled faintly. Legend. They gave her the rifle, just to hold. That was their first mistake. And somewhere, on a high ridge with wind in her hair and silence all around, a woman with silver streaks in her braid lay prone, steadying her aim. She breathed in, and the world held its breath with her.